Welcome to the Midnight Dreary, your rest stop on the highway of the unexplained. Pull up a bar stool and grab a drink as we present tonight's episode. And here's your host, Justin Wood.
Welcome, guys, to this week's episode of the Midnight Dreary, your rest stop on the highway of the unexplained. I am your host, Jay Wood, and we're in October, full force. Love it. I'm beginning to see Halloween decorations up in my neighborhood, and the cool weather actually came through this week. We're in the deep south here on the Midnight Dreary, but I hope wherever you're at, you're enjoying comfortable weather. And if you're getting ready for Halloween, shoot me an email. Let me know what you're dressing up as. I will also accept Halloween party invitations, TheMidnightDreary@yahoo.com. And if you have any traditions that you do for Halloween, if you're taking the kids out, let us know. Would love to know about it. All over the world, we've had a lot of downloads recently. We wish you, first of all, we thank you for all the downloads. And I would really like to know about your costumes, your kids' costumes. What are you wearing this year for Halloween? That's always been a struggle for me because I want something really nice. I love all aspects of the supernatural and the creepy and folklore. So I never know which route to go. But I want my costume to be good, look like I invested some time into it, and I expect the same for my kids because if they're getting free candy from our lovely neighbors, there needs to be a reason to get it. If you just throw them in something cheap, I can't do it. I got to put some time into it. So let me know how your Halloween, your spooky season's going, wherever you're at. And again, thank you for tuning in. And before we get into the meat of this podcast, got an interesting email today. Do any of you guys sign up for Ancestry.com, newspapers.com, any of those services? I think they're great, and trust me, I have no affiliation with them. Would love that one day, not now. I like looking at the records. I like looking at the history. I think it gives you a deep appreciation of, what our ancestors actually went through. When you pull up these photographs of people that lived, over 100 years ago, and how tough the times were back then. We're grateful to have this modern technology, and I feel like we're spoiled by it a lot. And so, just a harsh reality when I read this one email newspapers.com sent, and they did it, I'm sure, in honor of the Halloween season, but the old newspaper headline, Mother clings to body of soldier son, keeping casket in haunted house at Medora 12 years before burial. And forgive me if I said that wrong, I believe it's Medora, Indiana, according to Wikipedia, but I read it as Medora. So let's get into this. The story revolves around Aesop Wilson, who would have been about 17 to 18 years old at his death. His birthday's not known on here, and I'm looking at his profile on findagrave.com. His parents were Creed Taylor Wilson and Sophia Douglas Wilson. And young Aesop, like many of his peers, in 1861, ran off to join the Union Army. He was headed up to Missouri, and he didn't see any combat, but what happened is he got typhoid fever in camp, and young Aesop only had a chance to send one letter to his mother before the typhoid took him. So she got one letter, and I think people really need to appreciate how tough it was back then, communication. You're in a civil war, your 16 to 17-year-old son, 16 to 18, just left home for the first time, and it appears he snuck out in the middle of the night so he could go fight. You get a letter several weeks later, the only letter, and then the next time you hear about him, he's dead from typhoid fever. So Miss Wilson received that letter from her son, again, Aesop Wilson, and then a couple of weeks later, she got notice that young Aesop had passed away, not even in battle, which he went to fight for, typhoid fever in a camp. And there's an interesting article. This article comes from the Jackson County Banner in Brownstown, Indiana in 1935. It's really, really good. It tells a background about the house they lived in and how the mother had propped up Aesop's coffin in the window. So what happened was, when the parents went to retrieve the body, they finally got it back, and she had a hard time accepting young Aesop's death, rightfully so. And so she looked at it because it had been buried for a short time because he was killed in a camp. And again, the communication was trouble to get. So they dug him up, put him in a casket. His mother wanted to see him. And she wasn't sure if that was her son or not. And it appears that she just didn't want to accept the harsh reality that he passed away. So they had the coffin encased in charcoal, it doesn't tell the reason why, and sealed up in a lead coffin. And she put it in the house near the front window, so it was in view. And this house later became the haunted house in the neighborhood. And that's what it's called in this article. I'm going to read the last part of the article because from that point where they get the casket up until Aesop finds his final resting place, it gets a little interesting. In fact, it gets very interesting. In April of 1862, Dr. Wilson, Aesop's father, had shipped a metal casket to Boonville, and Aesop's body was disinterred and shipped back home in that casket. Still not satisfied that it was that of her son, Miss Wilson had the casket opened and gazed once more on her youngest child's features. She still could not consent to the burial of the body. At her request, an undertaker packed the body in charcoal and sealed the casket. It was placed in the upstairs hallway in front of the window. For 12 years, the mother kept the casket there. Each afternoon, she would go upstairs, make herself comfortable in a little wicker chair, sew and talk to her dead son. All of this time, Dr. Wilson insisted that the body should be buried. Finally, in 1873, he heard of a Mr. and Miss Kegwin, spiritualist of Louisville, Kentucky. He wrote to the couple and found they would come to the home for $50 and act as mediums, so Miss Wilson could converse with her son. They arrived during a gloomy afternoon and arranged for a seance that night. Curious neighbors, bonnets and hats pulled over their eyes, trudged through the heavy rain to gather at the home as soon as darkness fell. After a long, terrifying pause, Miss Huffington says she was sitting there on her father's lap, holding tightly to his coat lapels. And a sidebar, Miss Huffington is Aesop Wilson, the dead soldier boy, his niece. She was 5 years old, and she's telling her recollection of the events as she was there during this seance, and that's what they're putting out in the article. From seemingly nowhere, a muffled voice, dim and faint, could be heard in the room, seeming to hover over the pale form of Miss Wilson. Miss Wilson, trembling with emotion and certain it was the voice of her son, asked, "Who is this talking?" "This is Aesop, Mother," replied the voice. "We can barely hear you. Why don't you talk louder?" asked Miss Wilson, tears running down her cheeks. "It is damp and rainy outside, and I can not get nearer," replied the voice. After other conversation in which the mother was firmly convinced the voice was that of her son, she timidly asked, "Would you like to have your remains buried?" "Yes, Mother." "Where?" she asked. "In the cedars just north of the house," replied the voice. The body was buried next day. 2 years later, Dr. Wilson passed away and was buried in the old family cemetery at Leesville. What a great story. Again, Jackson County Banner, January 23rd, 1935. This was from newspapers.com. And when I read it, man, fell in love with it. It has every aspect of a good haunted story you want to hear. So the house stood for years after that and apparently went into disrepair, and curious onlookers, nosy neighbors, rummaged through the home, and that's where they actually found Aesop's last letter. There's also a picture of Miss Wilson, Aesop's mother. She's a unique, striking-looking woman, very haunting in her photograph. And so if you ever want to check this article out or any others, I can't recommend newspapers.com highly enough. And again, I have absolutely zero affiliation with them. But I think especially during a haunted season, and you look at these old black and white photographs and read about days gone by and creepy events in the past, just makes it even more creepy and just a perfect setting for this time of year. So guys, I hope you enjoyed that brief story we talked about of Aesop Wilson. And if you want to pay your respects, you can always go to findagrave.com, search Aesop Wilson in Indiana, and leave him a kind note on his memorial page. And without further ado, let's get into the top 5 scary paintings as voted on by the Midnight Dreary. And these are not going to be in any particular order. Sometimes I'll do rankings. I don't think it's fair to do it with art because they're so subjective, and I want you guys to go out, look at these, find out which one's creepy, which one you may not think is that creepy, and if you find any others that just are horrifying or really resonate with you, again, email me, tell me about these. You can find prints of these guys if you want some cheap prints for Halloween decor, or if you're an art aficionado and want to dress up your house with some spooky paintings. I hope this will guide you a little bit. So without further ado, let's get into the first one. You will know this one. I wanted to do something familiar. The Scream. You've seen this one. The creepy man holding the sides of his face in a iconic scream. The Scream is one of the most iconic paintings in the history of art. It was created by Norwegian artist Edvard Munch. The painting exists in several versions, including paintings, lithographs, and pastels, created between 1893 and 1910. Most well-known version of the Scream depicts a figure standing on a bridge with a turbulent and vividly colored sky in the background. The figure appears to be in the throes of extreme anguish, covering its ears with its mouth wide open in a silent scream. The entire scene is rendered with swirling, distorted forms that contribute to the overall feeling of intense emotion. Munch created the Scream during a period of his life marked by personal turmoil and mental anguish. The painting is widely interpreted as an expression of existential anxiety and the overwhelming emotions that come with the human condition. It has become an enduring symbol of modern art and a representation of the universal experience of anxiety and despair. There's several versions of the Screams. The most famous is held in the National Gallery in Oslo, Norway, and it was actually stolen in 1994 but later recovered. It remains one of the most celebrated and studied works of art in the world. And number 4 on our list, The Flaying of Marsyas. And if you're an art guru and I am saying any of these words wrong, please correct me. But I'm just reading them as I see it. It looks like The Flaying of Marsyas. And this is a brutal painting. This gentleman is being held upside down and flayed alive. And The Flaying of Marsyas, it's a painting by the Baroque artist Titian, also known as Tiziano Vecellio. This work was completed around 1570 to 1576 during the later period of Titian's career. The painting depicts a gruesome and mythological scene from Greek mythology. Marsyas, known for his musical prowess, challenged Apollo, who was the god of music, to a musical contest. Despite his considerable talent, Marsyas was defeated. As punishment, Apollo had Marsyas flayed alive, a particularly cruel and agonizing form of execution. In Titian's painting, Marsyas is depicted in the midst of this grisly ordeal, hanging upside down as a group of figures, including Apollo, carry out the punishment. The painting is characterized by its dramatic use of light and shadow, creating a heightened sense of emotion and tension. Titian's skillful rendering of the human form, as well as ability to convey the intense physical and emotional suffering of the condemned, makes this painting a powerful and impactful work of art. And you can find The Flaying of Marsyas. It's part of the collection at the Museo de Prado in Madrid, Spain. How about that pronunciation from a southern boy? It continues to be admired for its mastery in depicting both the beauty and brutality of the human form. Certainly a brutal painting. This may not be one that you want to keep up year-round. For Halloween, it may be good. Kind of reminds me of a little bit of modern art. The devil went down to Georgia. You've got someone challenging a god or a devil to a music contest, except in Devil Went Down to Georgia, Johnny wins. Marsyas did not, and he got flayed. Coming in midways at number 3, Saturn Devouring His Son. And I would be willing to bet you've seen this painting at some point. You may not have recognized the backstory to it. This is a haunting and powerful painting created by the Spanish artist Francisco Goya, part of a series of works known as black paintings, which Goya created directly on the walls of his home, known as the Quinta del Sordo, which is the Villa of the Deaf, around the years 1819 through 1823. The painting depicts the mythological figure Saturn, also known as Cronus in Greek mythology, who, fearing a prophecy that one of his children would overthrow him, decided to devour each of his offspring immediately after they were born. In the painting, Saturn is shown in a frenzied state, his mouth wide open with blood dripping from his chin. His eyes are wild and his grip on the lifeless body of the child is ferocious. It is. It's a very graphic painting. Saturn looks like a yeti and is ferociously chomping into his child. The black paintings as a whole are considered some of Goya's most intense and personal works. They were created during a period in his life when he was disillusioned and suffering from mental and physical health issues, which is reflected in the dark and often disturbing themes of these paintings. This painting is now housed in the Museo del Prado in Madrid, Spain. Hey, that's where the other one's at also. So if you ever get a chance, you're going to see a lot of great paintings if you visit Madrid and the Museo del Prado, where it remains a powerful and iconic example of Goya's ability to convey the depths of human suffering and brutality through art. A lot of these artists were really tortured mentally, and their outlet seems to be the canvas, which, you don't want anybody to go through that, but I think in that time, that's probably not the worst outlet to put your emotions into painting, because they've created some gorgeous works of art. So again, that painting that came midways at number 3, Saturn devouring his son. And at number 2, as we're closing down our list, this is a personal favorite of mine just because I love the ocean and shark attacks. You don't really think about a shark attack being in a well-known painting, but this is called Watson and the Shark. It's a notable painting created by the American artist John Singleton Copley, completed in 1778, and it's considered one of Copley's most famous works. The painting depicts a dramatic scene of a shark attack on a young man named Brooke Watson. Watson, who was a British merchant, lost his leg in a shark attack in Havana Harbor, Cuba, in 1749. The incident became well known, and Watson's survival and subsequent success in life were often cited as a testament to human resilience. In the painting, we see Watson being rescued from the water by a group of sailors in a small boat. The shark is portrayed with its jaws open, lunging towards Watson, who is desperately reaching for the outstretched hand of one of the sailors. The scene is set against a tumultuous and churning sea, creating a sense of urgency and danger. And if you look at the shark in this painting, it looks like a shark, but the nose, the snout of a shark, people in this time didn't really know what they look like, and they were drawing from what they've heard. So that's always been one of the discussion points that artists talk about. They were going off of what they had heard about sharks and sea creatures. So there's some updated versions, and which one is smaller? It looks a little more like a great white, but the original one, the nose and the mouth are kind of separate. Looks a little bizarre. But Copley, his meticulous attention to detail and his skill in capturing the moment really makes this a powerful, emotionally charged piece of art. And he was commissioned by Watson to paint this. And, the painting was well received, played a significant role in establishing Copley's reputation as a leading artist of his time. This is in America. Watson and the Shark, housed in the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. So if you ever want to take a trip to D.C. and you have a chance to visit the National Gallery of Art, you can see this piece. There are several others Copley painted, but the most famous and the original is the National Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C. And seriously, one more shout out to Brooke Watson, who commissioned a painting of probably the worst event in his life, that he loses his leg to a shark attack and decides, let's get it on canvas. Let's put that in the living room. Everybody can enjoy what took my leg off. So, cool painting, cool backstory to it. And at the beginning of the podcast, I told you this is not ranked in any order. These are just 5 that I chose. I would love for you to look at on your own time and let me know what you think. But for number 1, I truly think this belongs in the number 1 spot of creepy paintings. This one is called The Triumph of Death. If you've never seen this painting, I highly encourage you to look it up. And it's such a massive painting with a lot of detail. It is an apocalyptic scene. A bunch of skeletons and zombie-like creatures are overtaking, looks like a village, a kingdom. They have that real slim, wiry look to them. complete Renaissance style. And they're murdering. There's creepy, ghostly horses in this picture and fires, men getting stabbed, hung on stakes. It is really a brutal, yet mesmerizing and beautiful and horrifying. It is a complete conflict of emotions when you look at this painting. This one is The Triumph of Death, and the artist was Peter Bruegel the Elder. It was completed in 1562, considered one of the most iconic works of the Northern Renaissance. The painting depicts a grim and macabre scene of death's triumph over humanity. It portrays a vast landscape filled with countless figures, illustrating various aspects of human life and society in the face of mortality. The central focus of the painting is a skeletal figure representing death, often depicted as a skeleton or skeleton-like figure wielding a scythe, a powerful symbol of mortality. In the foreground, there are scenes of chaos and despair. Soldiers, peasants, and nobles alike are depicted succumbing to death. The skeletal figure and its army of skeletons and corpses are shown in a victorious procession, riding on horseback, herding the living towards their inevitable end. The background of the painting offers a vast panoramic view of a desolate landscape with burning villages and decaying buildings. This creates a sense of hopelessness and destruction, emphasizing the universality of death's power. The Triumph of Death is notable for its detailed and intricate composition. Absolutely, this is a very, very detailed painting, very detailed scene. You can look at this whole scene and you're almost looking at several paintings and occurrences in one. It is really vast. Showcases Bruegel's mastery in depicting complex scenes. It serves a powerful reminder of the transience of life and the inevitability of death. And once again, this is in the Museo del Prado in Madrid, Spain, where it continues to be a significant and thought-provoking piece of art history. That museum has some great pieces over there, so if you've ever been there, let me know as well. Shout out to our Spanish listeners. This one, highly encourage you to take a look at it. I think all are great candidates for being a creepy painting. I think they're great, and their artists are well respected. However, there is something just captivating about the Triumph of Death. I can look at it for the longest time, and I'm still discovering new features in it. And this is zoomed in on my computer. You've got to take a look at it. If you like complex scenes, and especially a Renaissance style, the Triumph of Death will suit you very well. That wraps up our top 5 paintings that I think are creepy. But before I go, I thought of this, and this is a last second cut in, so I didn't write any of this out. But looking over at my books on my shelf, there's some art that I remembered from my favorite books that I think belong on this list as well. The Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark. Now, these are not paintings, so maybe they don't go directly on the list, but I think the art itself is notable. So if you've ever read Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, it's a 3-part collection. They have some of the creepiest drawings you will ever see. And if you grew up in the 90s like I did, parents didn't even want their kids reading these books because the drawings are enough to give them nightmares. Straight nightmare fuel. I'm reading an article on it right now, looked it up really quick. And so many parents talking about why they wouldn't let their kids read them, and the author is talking about why it was one of the most banned books. Some of the stories are really good, and some are just typical folklore on there, but the art is what sells them, man. So if you ever get a chance, and if you ever want an additional collection of books on your shelf for Halloween season, Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark gotta be number 1. One of the greatest book collections of all time, and a pretty good movie too. I think that one came out in 2019. I remember going to see it. I thought it was fun to see, but man, those original books back in the days of Goosebumps and Tales from the Crypt and all the scary media that we had back then was awesome. So let me know what you guys think. I want to expand on the discussion of the paintings. Please submit me what you think belongs on that list, TheMidnightDreary at yahoo.com. And anything on your mind that revolves around spooky season, scary stories to tell in the dark or to tell in the daytime if you want to, send them to me, and maybe the next topic will be one you submit. I am your host, Jay Wood, and thank you guys for joining us on this 10th episode of The Midnight Dreary.
Thanks for stopping by The Midnight Dreary. We'll be open again next week to serve up more drinks and more mysteries. Until then, safe travels.